Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to Sarah Lee Terry Woods. We have done an amazing job, I think, through 2020 of creating this book club and having some phenomenal speakers. I am so excited about tonight's speaker, and I will have to tell you that Nancy DeKalb recommended you several months ago, and I put it on my list, and then I recircled back around when we had Parnassus do their book review at the end of the year, and they recommended this book. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Just a plug, if you're not a member of WPC, I encourage you to join. We are offering some great programming. I am loving the virtual stuff because it gives everybody the opportunity to pop in and out as they would like. So I encourage you to join. We will open up toward the end for Q&A, but please put questions in the box. And now I want to turn over to longtime WPC member and former owner and still current owner, but former actual building owner of Bookman Bookwoman to Sarah Lee Woods. And I'm going to go Sarah Lee.
Bricks and mortar. I think that's what we call it. We had 20 great years. I am delighted to be here today with a terrific author. Welcome you all to our book club discussion, and I hope even when we're going back to things in person, we can keep doing some virtual stuff like this, because it's really nice to not have to leave your own little computer and do that. So Kevin Wilson is a terrific author. He is from Tennessee, which I found out a few minutes ago, which I don't know why I did not know that. Went to Vanderbilt, and is now an associate faculty member teaching creative writing at the University of the South. And I am going to quickly, Kevin, go through your books. When did you start teaching at Sewanee?
We moved here in 2005.
Okay. All right, because I may have the dates of these wrong. I went back to look. You know, I can remember shelving these books back in the day, but I can't remember the year. Tunneling to the Center of the Earth, 2009, which book list said it's wildly imaginative in the manner of the new weirdness fiction. That's a great, I thought, okay, that I understand. The Louisville Courier Journal said, genuinely surreal, but affecting short stories about spontaneous combustion, Scrabble, and angst at all ages. Read if you love George Saunders. 2011, The Family Thing, New York Times bestseller, named one of the 10 best books of the year by Time, People, Salon, and Esquire. Ann Patchett said The Family Thing is a comedy, tragedy, tour de force examination of what it means to make art and survive your family. The best single word description would be brilliant. Perfect Little World in 2017, delicious. NPR said Wilson is such an inventive and witty writer. His perfect little world of a novel pretty much lives up to its title. Baby, You're Gonna Be Mine in 2018, darkly funny. The stories stick with the reader and show a terrible world made less so, sometimes by human contact, even though humans were usually the problem in the first place. And then we get to 2019, which I was fortunate enough to have an arc put in my hands by Parnassus, and I read, I think, in one day. Let me see. New York Times Book Review says, I can't believe how good this book is. Wholly original. It's also perfect. Wilson writes with such a light touch. That's the brilliance of the novel, that it distracts you with these weirdo characters and mesmerizing funny sentences, and then hits you in a way you didn't see it coming. Bravo.
Oh, thanks.
That's great. And I don't see a gray hair on your head. They're just, you know, your books just get better and better. So did you read The Firestarter by Stephen King when you were really young? Or tell me about the spontaneous human combustion. I mean, I didn't even look that up because I want your definition. That is just brilliantly weird.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, it's something I've written about in a lot of my books. And probably when I was, I don't know, 9 or 10, there was always on TV the Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown book
Mhm,
series, and
mhm.
I loved all those kinds of books, like Bigfoot and UFOs. I was interested in that kind of space of the unknown. And there was maybe in one of these books just a little page on spontaneous human combustion, people who, for no real rhyme or reason, would burst into flames. And for whatever reason, it stuck with me, from the time I was a child, and it just kind of was this constant recurring image in my head. Um, and I was always a really nervous, anxious kid, and that continued all through my life. And um, eventually, I had always felt like bursting into flames made sense because I had all these tics. My body was like constantly agitated, and even now I still have these tics with my head. And when I was an adult in my 30s, I finally was diagnosed with Tourette's, and that made some sense to me, right? Like that gave me some understanding of like what was going on in my body. Um, and that's what it always felt like. I might burst into flames, and so that was fine. I medicated and can handle it and can take care of myself, right? So um but then we had kids. I have two boys, and they're 13 and 8. And then when Griff, my oldest, was 2, maybe he started to exhibit some of these same traits. He had tics, his eyes and his head. And we took some videos and sent them to his pediatrician, and she said he might, he very well could have it. It's early. And so that moment, immediately I just felt this intense guilt, right? That like my genes, that I passed this on to this boy that I loved. And so I thought, oh God. And I knew how to take care of myself if I burst into flames. But what I wanted to find out is, how do you protect somebody that you love if they burst into flames, right? That's a completely different situation. And that's really all this book was. I just wanted to know, how do you take care of someone uh, that might burst into flames. And that was really all I started with. And that's the whole book in some ways, is me trying to figure out how to take care of my kids.
Wonderful. Absolutely absolutely wonderful, because the kids are the children are just the children in your books are always really good. I
Oh,
mean,
thanks.
you give them, you make them interesting, which sometimes, as an adult reader, you're like, oh, you flip through kid stuff, but you don't do that. So that helps to understand uh, how empathetic that you are to that. I was delighted to, I did not know you had gotten a Shirley Jackson award, because I love her. She was my first weird writer crush. And I read the recent biography about her, and
Me
just,
too.
oh, I just thought, how does she do all of this and live with this man, and, anyway, juggle everything that she did. Um, so when you were reading things or watching TV, was she one of the people that you thought, this is what absurd weirdness, speculative fiction? I never knew where to shelve that in the bookstore. Was it just in literature, which is where we put your books, or was it over with Stephen King and Thomas Harris and some other Ursula Le Guin? And where did it go? So what is speculative fiction?
I mean, I have a hard time figuring that out as well, to be honest. Um, because I grew up not reading what people would call literature, probably. I read comic books and fantasy and science fiction, and that was my entry into literature. So I don't think that much about it. And I will say, Shirley Jackson is my favorite writer. She is my touchstone. And that biography, like you mentioned, when I read it, and I'd known some of her life, but I felt a real kinship with her. This idea of like, that you can have darkness and strangeness in your literature, and yet you have a family, right? And there's this whole other aspect of your life where you're actually existing in the real world. Um, and she was the real touchstone for me to figure out how to write. And so much of her work, what I love is everybody, like with Stephen King, like you think the monsters are out in the world, and little by little you realize that they might actually be inside of you, right? And that's harder to deal with. And I think Shirley Jackson's one of the most brilliant psychological writers that I've ever read. So yeah, she was my touchstone. And one of the things too is I have a really hard time out in public, and you'll know, like in my work too, I rarely make characters leave a house or a space. Like people don't go. I don't ever want my characters to leave. And that's Shirley Jackson too, right? Oftentimes there's a house, this huge imposing structure, and people rarely walk outside of it. And I kind of like that too, that the more you stay in a singular space, the more the story can develop and the more you can kind of learn about the character. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's my everything.
So I just reread. We all live in the castle.
We've always lived in the castle.
And when you read that, when you're older, as I don't know, you sort of get it, especially now, with confinement and stuff too. And of course, the lottery is still like the scariest thing that maybe Salem's Lot, but the lottery, it's just still applies so much to, I think, yeah, we would do that today. I hope not on my street, but we would do that.
Yeah.
So if she might be the author you would invite to dinner if when you're interviewed by the Times and you get to.
Oh yeah, I never understand. I would never want anybody to come to my house to have dinner. I can't even imagine that. I've that question always. I could not figure that out. But yeah, Shirley Jackson would be nice because she probably wouldn't come. She was agoraphobic, so I would invite her.
That's great. Only invite the people that would come. The other thing I did not know about you, and I'm so glad you said it. Books you've, I think it was one of the things I read about you. Books people have asked you if you've read, and Ulysses was one of those you said is the most impenetrable book you ever tried to read. I was like, oh, great. If a brilliant writer can say that, I mean, I can't tell you how many times, people would come in the store and expound upon it, and I'd try again. And I was just, I had the attention span of a gnat. So I could, and it's probably brilliant, but I didn't get it.
Yeah, I struggle a lot. And I think maybe I missed the window when I could have been in a classroom where someone could have helped me kind of through that dense material. But there's just a lot of books I haven't read. In college, I went to Vanderbilt, and I grew up in a really rural, in the middle of nowhere, and really didn't know anything about literature. And at Vanderbilt, it opened that world up for me. And once I understood that contemporary literature existed, that there were people right now writing, that's all I wanted to read. And so I didn't read anything else. All the classes I took were contemporary Southern literature. And that's been the thing that I've kind of dedicated myself is the work that exists right now. And so I have all these blind spots. And then I go back and I read these wonderful books, and they help inform my life, but I definitely have huge, huge gaps in my reading.
You and me both. I mean, because, when you get older, you kind of read I did that all my life. I read what I wanted to. And if I didn't get it so many pages in, then I went on to something else. So tell me, what were you most surprised about? Or what did you think about the fabulous reception you got with this latest book? They're all great, but this one was just, this is the one that Jenna Bush picks, and people are just acting like, it was great. So how was all of that to deal with?
It was incredible. I mean, who wouldn't want that? It was the reason that I started to write was partly just because I was just such a insular, lonely kid that reading books was what connected me to the world. It was what helped me understand what the outside world might be like. And I loved those writers so much that I wanted to write books too, right? And for me, because I don't go out in the world much, the things that I write are these little flares that I send up into the world, and you just hope somebody sees them. But it's not that I expect it, it's just luck. And so in 2019, when the book came out and got the reception that it did, it was so lovely and so wonderful to know that that the book reached more people than I could have imagined. But the kind of lovely thing too is I live on a mountain in Tennessee. Like nobody knows who I am. I don't see anybody, and so I can be happy that the book reached a wide audience, and I had these incredible experiences like going on the Today Show with Jenna Bush, and that was all really incredible. But at the end of the day, I just go back home to my little house in the woods, and I get to do the thing that I really love, which is write. But it was still like nothing I could have experienced or imagined.
Yay. And I love I love the blurbs that Ann Patchett gives to you, another writer, because obviously she is a huge fan and enjoys your writing so much, which is super. So
Yeah,
I
I was
like
her. I met her when I was just out of college. I was her dog sitter. I used to live at Ann's house and take care of Rose.
that's important, very
Yeah,
important job.
it was.
Yes, it is. Um, so also we have Judge Anna Escobar, who just joined us. Welcome, Judge. We're glad to see you here tonight with us. It's always fun when we can have our leaders join us. So what are you doing any kind of different kinds of writing during all of this? I know you said you're working, homeschooling your sons. I mean, how is that affecting your process of thought process? And your wife, of course, is successful.
Yeah, my wife is also a writer. She's a poet. And that's been, I don't write that much, honestly. I don't write every day or every week or every month. I write maybe 2 months out of the year, if you add it all up. Mostly because I teach and I like it, and I have 2 boys and I love them, and they don't want me to write. You know, they want me to play with them, and so I would rather do that. You know, I never want to have that moment where it just feels very weird to say like, oh, I don't want to do this with you or be around you because I got to go write this book. If the book is important to me, I'll find the time somehow. But I was deeply into a novel, and I had expected it to finish it in the summer. That's usually when I would write. And so when the pandemic hit and the boys were on me 24/7, we built a treehouse instead. So I didn't write a book.
Oh, great.
And so that's been really difficult because now I am ready to finish this new book, but that's not probably going to happen for a while. And we're still homeschooling the boys. We're starting the semester I'll be teaching. So for me, I love writing so much, and so I'm always writing in my head. Right. Like even when I'm walking, we
Mhm.
walk the dog, me and my 2 sons and my wife, and I'm thinking about that book, and that's makes me happy. Right. So even if I'm not writing, I still have that. Um, but the pandemic has created this situation where um, we're on top of each other constantly, that it's just not possible for me to think about a story outside of myself, because the story is happening right now with all of us, and it's hard for me to concentrate on anything other than that.
It's going to be real interesting to see how the pandemic as a plot, plays out.
I said almost everything I write in the 90s. So, and part of it is to avoid having to deal with anything that happens that's current. I just always write about 1996, and I'm just safe in that spot.
Yeah. What is it? Sue Grafton never dated her plots, but to the time cell phones came, she was like, nope, Lindsay's only gonna, deal with I guess the 80s,
Yeah.
beating up Volkswagen, when she was doing that. And also you talked about how you really develop your characters first and then the plot comes. Is that what I understood?
Yeah, a lot of times it's just I have a character in my head, and that's what I just start living with that person for a while, and you live with them until you start to fall in love with them a little bit, and then once you've got that kind of set, then you want to write a story for them, right? To make them kind of love you back, like you want to give them a narrative that's worthy of them. And so a lot of times when I write, it's just a character. I don't know anything about the story yet. This book was slightly different because I knew I wanted to write about kids that burst into flames. That's all I knew. I was going to write a book about how do you take care of kids who burst into flames? And I knew the kids couldn't be the focal point because they would be too busy bursting into flames. They couldn't do much in the story. And so that's when I thought of Lillian. And little by little, before I really had the plot, I was just thinking about her, what her situation was, where she had come from, what her voice sounded like. And it's a weird thing. It's not, it's all make believe, but like they live inside of you, just right inside your skin, that they start to become you a little bit and you become them. And then there's that moment where you've got to create a narrative so that they move, right? So that they actually do something. And that's just how I write. I live with someone until I can figure out how to get them to where they need to go.
I got, so where did the character of Jasper come from? Because I reread Nothing to See Here this week. And it's interesting, speculative on my part. Oh, that's a little bit of X, a little bit of Y.
Yeah, I mean, Jasper, in so many ways, what I knew was that a lot of the book was going to be about power, right? Like, Lillian is in a position of very little power, and so when I tried to think about, well, what kind of power exists in the world, political power was one of the things that I began to think about, and once I started to think about Tennessee, and I was like, okay, I could just kind of imagine Jasper, right, as this kind of familial legacy, as a person who is kind of preordained to be important, to wield that power in some way. And it's weird because for all the characters, I kind of love them, honestly. But Jasper is the difficult sticking point. And a lot of people in book clubs are like, well, we knew he was bad because he didn't like Dolly Parton. And I think that's true. Like, it's hard to recover from that. I think if you don't like Dolly Parton, you're the bad character in the book. But
Right.
even Jasper, the only way I could, because I need to love the character in some way, or not love them, but understand them, right? I need to figure them out, or else they're just so flat. And for Jasper, the only thing that could make me feel tender to him was the idea that maybe he never wanted any of this power. He's a familial legacy. And so he's just walked into it. Like, you can't turn it down, so you live with it, and it warps him a little bit. And that's what I kept telling myself, was that Jasper does these bad things, but part of it might be because he never wanted to be in this position in the first place. And that allowed me to feel tenderness toward him. I don't even know if it's true, but that's how I got through it.
So how did you feel tenderness towards Madison?
Oh, I love Madison. And partly it's because I'm writing in the voice of Lillian. Lillian is me in that book. And so Lillian loves Madison. So I loved her. I saw her the way that Lillian did. And Madison, for me, I get it. She does bad stuff, but she always eventually ends up trying to do the right thing. And with her, what I understood was, what would it be like to be constantly discounted, to be rich and to be powerful, but for no one to ever really take you seriously or believe that you could do anything with that power would be maddening. And so I get her way more than I get Jasper. Like, I know why Madison wants to rise. I know why she wants to do things to put herself in an advantageous position. Whereas Jasper, I feel like he's already got everything. I don't know why he needs to be president. But I can understand why Madison wants to be important. It makes sense to me. And so I love, again, if I can find that little moment of tenderness for the character, it lets me do some work. It lets me figure them out a little more. And so for me, that's Madison.
And I'm having hold on a second, I've got to look and see. The guy that's the fixer, the political, Carl,
yes.
Carl was very interesting too. He's sort of a jack of all trades. Behind anyone who's worked in politics knows Carl.
I knew that. I knew that Lillian was going to be this wild character in some ways, and so I needed a square. And so I had Carl, and I was like, oh, he'll just be the square who just kind of comes in and harumphs all the time. But even Carl, as I started to write, I started to feel tender for him. And by the end, I really kind of loved him. I thought he was at the heart of things, a good person. And so I think about this all the time, that so much of writing for me is this attempt in my real life that the longer that you spend with someone, the more and more you dig into their circumstances, the more that it's not that you necessarily like them or even approve of them, right? But you understand them, and that gives you some insight and tenderness for them. And I try to remember that in the real world too, that the more time that I can spend trying to understand or watch them on their own terms, the less likely I might be to dislike them or feel adversarial to them. So I think I write sometimes to try to make myself a little bit of a better person.
Sounds like we should aspire to in our leaders, just get on the, see what it's like to stand in their shoes for a few minutes and see where they are coming from. I'm going to go to a couple of the questions. Joyce McDaniel wants to know if there's going to be a sequel, or are we going to know what's happened to the twins?
Oh, I've had that question. I've gotten asked that question a lot. It's really interesting to me, and I do think about the Lillian and the kids so much. And it would be neat to revisit it, but it's hard because I left them in that moment of grace, right? Like, it's not like their life's going to immediately be easy. It's going to be difficult. I just left them in this little place where it could be quiet for a moment. And so the thing that makes me a little scared is that if I keep telling their story, I got to put them in harm's way again. And I'm really reluctant.
Sure.
I'm really reluctant to do that. I want to leave them in that little place where they're happy.
Well, maybe someday when they have children.
Yeah, that would be nice.
To see what happens next. I think of the interview you did with Mary Laura Philpott on A Word on Words about your endings, as you sort of end them right before the ending. So you let the reader imagine or take characters, where they need to in their head, which is, it's really neat. Do that. Kathleen has a question.
Mm-hmm.
In Stephen King's book on writing, he notes that no one ever asked him about the language. So please tell us, please let us know about the language in your books.
Well, I'm not sure what we mean by language. So I'll take it from a couple of different points. Like, one is, my wife's a poet and I love reading her work, and most of my closest friends are poets, and I love their kind of the way that they create their lines, the rhythm of it. But I'm not that kind of writer. I have a really simple kind of voice. I have long sentences because I never stop the sentence. I keep going and going. But I'm really, really simple. I don't use big words. I use 1, 2, 3 syllable words. And for me, that's what I love, is that if I can make my voice as simple and as quiet as possible, the weirdness of the story won't overwhelm the reader, right? So for me, that kind of plain spoken voice is what lets me do the kind of work that I want to do. And it just happens that that's just my voice. I don't, just where I grew up and how rural I was, I'm worried about speaking above the language that makes me comfortable, right? I always feel false when I do that. So I have just a really rhythmically simple kind of voice, and it works for me and I like it. Now, if we talk about language in terms of bad language, now this is the book that my son, oldest Griff, has never read any of my books, but last year he asked if he could. And I thought, we read a book every night. We read at night. And he wanted to read Nothing to See Here, and I didn't want to read it to him. That seemed so strange. And so we listened to it on audiobook together at night. And it was these weird moments where he was like, he really liked it a lot, I think, and was touched by it. But he constantly was like, why is there so much cursing in it? He goes, I think, and there would always be these little lines where he's like, I don't think you needed that curse word. And I was like, maybe not. I don't know. But it was the first story with, I think Griff will also probably tell you that that's just how I talk too. Like, I think it's partly the Tourette's, but it just kind of is rhythmically part of the way that I talk. And so I have to really tamp that down in the real world constantly. So in this book, I was like, I'm just going to say what I want to say and let Lillian get to do the things that I can. And that's where it came from.
But you handle all of that brilliantly, Kevin.
Thanks.
I mean, it all works together. That's why your books are so good. They're brilliant,
thank you.
brilliant and readable. You know, we don't need a thesaurus the whole time to actually understand. Let me go back to some of the other questions that
Sure.
we have here. Let's see. What is the symbolism of the children catching on fire? Of all the things the kids could do, why do they catch on fire? Are they inspired by real characters?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, it goes all the way back to when I was a kid, and I could feel that agitation, and fire just made sense to me. And when I was a kid, I was afraid of bursting into flames. I was afraid that I would be in bed and my whole bed would catch on fire because of something that was inside of me. And then when I was a teenager, and that's when I first, was hospitalized and went to therapy and got medication. But when I was a teenager, I wanted to burst into flames. I so badly wished that I could, because I thought it would just burn out everything inside of me and I'd be like pure and clean. And fire seemed like that it could be restorative. And then when I got older, and now I'm the age that I am, I'm 42. Fire is the thing that I know that is always inside of me, and it always is going to be inside of me. And the key is to keep it so that fire inside of me never touches another person or harms them, right? And so it's all these different stages of what fire and bursting into flames is for me. But also my kids, like when they get weird and anxious, they look like they're going to burst into flames. And it was so strange because Griff, my oldest, he had night terrors, and he would wake up at 1 or 2 in the morning. His ears would be so red and his neck would be red. And we would sometimes put him in an ice cold shower to get him to cool down. And so when I was thinking about these children, that's what I was thinking about, that kind of anxiety or fear about the unknown that's around you, that your body starts to heat up. And that's what I started to figure out with Griff was, and I think ultimately that's the point of the book, is Griff, I can't stop him from bursting into flames, and he doesn't want me to try to stop him. I think he actually gets agitated when we would try to like solve the issue of his anxiety. All Griff wants is for me to be close to him, right? So that he knows like, oh, I'll be here. If you catch on fire, I'll catch on fire. And that's really all he needed, And so that's kind of, again and again, I just come back to fire. It's this kind of symbol that always works for me.
I have another. So why was, my question is, why was Lillian so patient? I mean, to me, she rose above so much when she could have just throttled someone. Certainly was a risk taker.
Yeah.
And her mom, where did her mother come from?
So my editor at the time, he did both Perfect Little World and Nothing to See Here with me. And he was like, do you want to go back into this novel and make the mom more sympathetic, like give her more depth? And I thought about it for maybe a week and I was like, not really. I just think she's a woman who had a kid and that immediately made life more difficult. And so there's one of two ways to proceed. You can either grab the kid and pull them through life and figure out how to protect them, or you can pretend that they don't exist to make your life a little easier. And that's the choice that I think Lillian's mom made. And that's why I think Lillian is so patient, is because she's worried that if she ruins things, she'll lose that person forever, right? Her mom never really notices her. And with Madison, it's this woman that cared about her very intensely for a brief period of time. And she's just, in her mind, Madison is always this person that loves her. And so if she messes that up, then she's gone too. So much I think of Lillian's life is wanting to be loved and wanting people to help her, but being terrified that if they see who she is, they'll leave, and so I think that's why she attaches so much to the children, because they so desperately need somebody to watch over them.
Right. And to give them ice cream.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you talk about the love? Elizabeth asked, can you talk about the love that exists between Lillian and Madison?
Yeah, it's a really complicated narrative, and one that I thought about a lot, which is it's a story about friendship to my mind. Lillian and Madison are friends, and there's an imbalance of power in that friendship, which I'm interested in because I don't think all friendships are equal. Sometimes I think that you'll allow an imbalance of power in a relationship because of the way that person makes you feel. You're willing to accept that imbalance of power. But beyond that, Lillian is in love with Madison. Lillian would marry Madison if she could. But it's a weird part of the novel because the book takes place in the mid 90s.
Uh-huh.
It's a young woman, Lillian, who grew up in the rural deep South. And it's just one of those things where I don't think that Lillian fully understands her identity or who she is. And
Mhm.
she's not really sure who she could talk to about it. And so with Lillian and Madison, they're kind of constantly trying to figure out what their relationship is and what's the safe place for them to exist together. And Madison kind of helps define that because Madison wants power. And so she can't be with Lillian. There's just no way. And Lillian loves Madison so much that she's willing to just be close, right? So it's that, again, I think it's love, but I think it's based on an imbalance of power that makes it a little stranger and harder to figure out.
Well, she certainly could not go to that doctor in Springfield, you
No.
know. Assistance. Oh, no. Woo, that was weird. That was good. Doctor of the stars, you know, doctor of the leaders. And I'm thinking, of course, you know, I'm thinking, who does he, I mean, who's this based upon, you know? Someone else said, loved your books, recommended it to others. You said art helps you survive during the trying times. During the past year, what have you been watching, reading, and listening to?
So one of the things is that it's been very difficult to read, honestly. Partly because my children are with me 24/7, and so it's really hard to then quiet my brain to read. Um, but what I have loved is reading with my children, and so I have a son who's 8, and I have a son who's 13, and so every other night I read to one of them, and then Leanne reads another book. So like right now, Leanne and Griff are reading Count of Monte Cristo, while I read a book with Patch. But Griff and I have started to make that shift to where I'm trying to read books with him that are intended for adults, but I still think work for children. And so this summer was the summer where we read books like Charles Portis's True Grit, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And it's been this lovely thing to experience the work again through the eyes of my child. And to see him respond to them. We actually did read Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which he loved.
Oh, yeah.
We're reading, Griff and I now have really been getting into the Nancy Drew, the original Nancy Drew books, which I loved so much as a kid. I couldn't get enough of them. And it's so wonderful to remember being 8 years old and I'm reading a line to Griff now at 42, and I can remember distinctly reading this book. As far as like what other things have kind of helped me in this moment, I knew early on in the spring. So in actually next week I start teaching again, and I wanted to teach a class on constrained spaces, isolation. And so I started reading books that are kind of where characters are kind of constrained in a singular space. So I'm teaching We Have Always Lived in the Castle, but I'm also teaching books like Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad, where what happens if the constraint is the entire country that you live in? What happens when it's impossible for you to actually move your body, that the constraint is literal chains? And then I read, which I'd never read, and I'm teaching it. It's a novel by a Swiss-born Italian writer named Fleur Jaeggi. It's called Sweet Days of Discipline, and it's about 100 pages, and it's set in a girls' boarding school in Switzerland. And I thought about that too. What does it mean to be kind of held within this boarding school? And what happens to your circumstances when all the people around you are not exactly family, but you see them all the time? So it's been really fun, and that's kind of helped me figure out that one of the things I always think about is I don't like to leave my house. I don't like to move around the world. I love to close myself up. And and so when I think about constraint, there's this interesting thing where you feel like the walls are so close, or you feel like the isolation is so overpowering that you can't move, that you're bound. And what I love about constraint is always, almost always, there's just a little bit of play in that constraint. You can move your arms just enough. And then what you learn is that there's enough for you to do what you need to do. And then once you figure out that you can move within that constraint, it's not as scary. And then you can figure out how to escape it and how to get free. And so I think a lot of times with my boys and with myself, I'm reading books right now to figure out how to get to a new place, how to get out of the world that I'm in and find my way towards something good. And that's what books have done for me always. And so I'm relying on them now to do that.
Sounds like uh, you're making everyone feel like they can be their own superhero or have their own
Yeah,
superpowers.
I think I don't think there's anything more lovely in the world um, than reading a book with somebody else, than reading with your children. The way that the world opens up in front of them, and you can actually see them respond to it. You're experiencing it alongside them. It's really and truly the happiest that I've been during this pandemic is that 30 minutes at night when we read to each other.
So someone just said, Sherry just asked, what's behind you? I know that's Batman because I asked you earlier what the action figures are.
Yeah, I grew up really loving comic books. I loved superheroes. They were um, I couldn't get into fantasy as much because I love the idea that these weird characters existed in the real world. Like I could go to New York City or something and see Spider-Man. And it's just a weird, I'm very childlike. I'm kind of stunted. That's why my children, I think, like being around me. Um, but there was this series of Batman statues, and it's just one of those things, like if you ever just mention that you like something, people then just start buying millions of them for you every birthday and Christmas. So now there's too many to stay in the house. So they're in my office, all my Batman statues. And Batman's okay, but I haven't really read the comics anymore. But one of the things that's nice is you get a student who comes here, they're 18, they've never lived away from home, and they come see their English professor and they walk in and it's me, and I look like a kid and I have these Batman statues. Like it opens up and calms them down and makes them feel at home. And some of them might like Batman, and that's a way for us to talk. So I'm always trying to figure out ways to disarm, but also make my students feel comfortable. And one of them is just to be like, I don't really know what I'm doing either. I'm still kind of a kid. So maybe we can figure it out together.
Oh, absolutely brilliant. I know what it's like to have people, you just have to see Larry in his books.
My sister liked like teddy bear figurines, and I think
Uh-huh.
she probably has 500 of them now. And she's like, I don't want them. I don't need them. I don't care about teddy bears anymore. But
Right.
people lock onto something.
Do you read aloud with your wife?
Well, that's interesting. So my wife and I really, when we write, what we do is when we go to write. So I wrote this book in 10 days and I went away. And so what we do is we find a cabin and we rent it, and I'll go away for 10 days. That's the longest one of us can take care of the kids on our own. And the other person, my wife and I, take turns, and she'll go away for 10 days and write. And then I'll go away for 10 days and write sometime, maybe a couple months later. And one of the most wonderful things is, it's stressful. It's hard. You're taking care of the kids on your own. You're doing all the housework. But then that person that you love is making something, right? And at night, the kids go to bed around 9. Then I'll call Leanne around 10, and then she reads me what she's written that day, and it's the most wondrous thing to hear the person that you love share the thing that they've just made. And Leanne is really the only person that reads my work. She's the first person, and so there's always that moment at night when I read those few pages, and I can hear her hearing it, and it's just wonderful. I don't know what I'd do without it. I don't know. I don't know if I could be married to somebody who didn't care about writing in the same way.
Well, appreciate each other's talents.
Yeah.
And that's a whole lot of love. 10 days. You stick me with the grandson for 5 days, 2 hours, but I'm like, little boys are busy, young and girls. Absolutely. That's a whole lot of love. Joyce, do you want to open up Joyce and Sarah, do you all want to show the screens and see if anyone else wants to ask anything? So there could be a really weird story about a best-selling author and her dog, and the dog being able to do something extraordinary. We're seeing Jenny Fields walk around a lot, and stuff to be fun.
Yeah.
With that. So,
Sarah, I may need you, if you're still on here. Is there a way to do this? Like you can ask for all of them at one time?
Put it on tic-tac-toe.
Yeah, I'm like trying to figure this. If anybody wants to ask a question and ask to Sarah Feigl.
Sure. I'm curious, you talk about your reading with your 13-year-old and moving into adult literature. I think about I have 2 boys, one of whom we're sure I ruined his life with literature. We read way too many tragedies and he's still in therapy for it. But I'm curious, when do you think you will want them to ask you about your writing and about these dysfunctional families and the deep sadness and failure of parents?
Oh, they already know, and they know lots of stuff. And I think they certainly, we're just very close. There are times where I feel like I wish maybe I hadn't exposed them to the kind of sadness that that I live with. But they're also what make me happy. But I think one of the things that the kids have wondered about with Family Fang, which is about bad parents, and I write a lot about bad parents, and the reason people have asked me why are all the parents in your book so bad? Why are they so awful? And part of it is because I had really wonderful parents. My mom, she's Japanese American. She moved with my grandmother when my grandmother came from Japan to Nashville when she was 18 and raised 3 kids on her own and couldn't speak English. And my dad grew up in Nashville as well. And they had me and my sister. And I was not an easy kid. I just had so many kind of things that I just couldn't handle. And I had to be hospitalized when I was a teenager. And one of the things, though, is that my parents, every week drove me to Nashville to see a therapist, which was unheard of in Winchester, Tennessee. My parents took care of me. And so I think I write about bad parents because it's the thing I can't imagine is what would it be like to not have a family that took care of you, right? I know that I would have disappeared from this world if my parents hadn't held on to me. And so that's what I write about, because I'm trying to figure out what is that? What would it be like to try to navigate the world without a person that protects you? And then I think I write about that because that's what I'm trying to figure out about the larger world too, is what does it mean to not be taken care of or protected? And how is that possible? And so that's what I want to try to figure out too in my work is, how can we make a family that's larger than our nuclear family, right? How can we build a world where we're all kind of connected and take care of each other? But also, I think my kids know this because I talk about it a lot, which is that to my mind, a child is perfect. And I don't care, I think they do bad things and I think they mess up, but I don't care about that. I think that they're pristine and beautiful. And I think that until the moment that they make a kid and the moment that you become a parent, it flips. You've just brought someone into the world that didn't ask for it. So now it's on you. You've created the situation and you have to deal with the ramifications of that. And I'm super suspicious of that impulse. And I've done it myself. My wife and I made 2 kids, and that's on us. Whatever happens to them, in some ways we brought them here and they didn't ask for it. So I just write about that uneasiness. What is it like to make somebody? And then watch them slowly become slightly unrecognizable. Already with my sons, there's moments where I don't quite recognize the person that they used to be. and it's really weird. But I also know what it was like to be a teenager and start to feel my identity start to break apart. The person that my parents had helped make, I started to break that into little pieces and reassemble it into the person that I wanted to be. And that was super necessary, but it's terrifying. I think it's terrifying on both ends. So there's only one thing I really write about, which is family. I always, and I think it's not meant to sound pejorative in any way, but I'm a domestic writer. All I care about is, how do you make a home? How do you fill it? And how do you keep it safe? And that's what I write about every single time. So the big detriment to that is, what if nobody took care of you?
So I think, Becca, it's my understanding you have 2 Sewanee grads with you tonight. Do you all have anything you wanted? Hang on, I'm trying to unmute you here.
When were y'all at Sewanee?
I think you're still, I can't hear. You may have to turn the volume. There you go.
Okay.
Good. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, good. We were a class of 94, and I was an English major. Yeah.
History.
Art history.
And art history. And we actually hung out with Kevin at a book club.
A Sewanee club.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
do you remember us?
We're really
You
obnoxious.
should say that.
We were stalking you through the book club. So.
My wife went to graduated from Sewanee in 1990.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, I talk about this a lot. My dad went to school here, and I just never would have gone because it was so close to home, and it would feel strange. I knew that if I went to Sewanee, I would live with my parents in the valley, and that would be bad for everybody. So I didn't go. But it's a school that I very much love, and I've been here since 2005 teaching, and I loved my time at Vanderbilt. And it was a great school for me, and so much of what I think about Sewanee is trying to recreate that experience of, I came from the middle of nowhere. I didn't know anyone, and I ended up at this school where people took you seriously and showed you what the world could be, and introduced you to interesting things. And so at Sewanee, it's a kind of beautiful place because it's still a place where the administration wants you to make those connections with students, like to actually be a human being and introduce them to things that are important. I can't imagine ever leaving this place. It's been so good for me. And Sewanee students are the students that I love because they don't want to hear this. And it's not what I mean. It sounds bad, but like, I'm not saying Sewanee students are brilliant or the smartest students. What I've always loved about Sewanee students is that they have a diverse range of interests, but also they're game for anything. Like if you ask them to try, they will try. And if they fail, they're okay with that. And that's what makes me so happy. And why I like teaching here is because I know I'm not going to get resistance. They're going to try and do their best. And it makes teaching really fun.
Cool.
That's good.
Sarah.
I would just say, as someone who taught for quite a while at Vanderbilt with a husband on the Vanderbilt faculty, you have just described to us your gift as a teacher. It's not the students. The students are all different. Every year, you have different classes. You have just described what you are able to evoke from students, and that is an incredible, incredible thing.
Oh, well, I don't know. Vanderbilt for me, I showed up as a freshman and I didn't know what I was doing. And I had this one teacher, Karen Westman, in the English department. And she was the first person who was like, I think you're okay at this and you should take women's studies. And I became a women's studies minor because she taught that. And then I met Tony Early, who was my professor for creative writing. And he was the first person who just said, like my junior year, I said, I think I want to try to do this. And he said, if you wanted to, I think you could. And that's all he said. It wasn't like he was like, you're brilliant or you can, he was like, I think if you want to do this, you could. And when you're 20 years old, that's really all that you need. You just need one person to say like, if you want to, I think you could. And so I remember that constantly in my head with my students is just that moment where you're like, dude, you can do this, you can. Because also you don't ever want to be the professor where the person goes on to be famous and they're like, and I remember Kevin Wilson said I'd never amount to anything, and where is he now? He's dead in the ground, you know. So I'm always like, you can do it, just try and you'll do it. And it makes me happy, and it keeps me, sometimes it makes me feel super old, but it also makes me constantly have to rethink the world around me, because there's constantly these new kids kind of forcing me to do that.
Sarah Lee, you're muted.
So that's what keeps you young, Kevin, which is absolutely great. My niece was at Swanee, might have been there with the Oberlander crew, Ashley Woods. Oh, you know, I was going to say she was, I think, and she majored in writing.
Ah,
I'm not sure if that was English lit or not. 90, I can't remember when she graduated, Larry. Maybe 92.
mm-hmm.
That when Meacham was there.
Meacham graduated in 90, I think. 90,
Yeah.
90 or 89 or 91, something like that.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. That's about the time when I married my husband. I got 3 teenagers. So when you're, you know, you talk about them changing, they come back. They might be 20, 21, but it's real interesting when they're teenagers.
Oh, don't tell me they come back, Sarah Lee.
No, I mean they come back.
I
They start thinking you have some. I didn't mean
Don't
they
tell
move
me-
back home.
don't tell me they
too,
come back. I mean,
but they start thinking you have sense again. You know,
Yeah.
when they go away from school, they'll start thinking, oh yeah, you know. So,
okay,
anyway.
I think we're close to the end. Does anybody
you.
one more question or anything? Grace?
I just want to
Yeah.
ask, what book, is there any books you're reading right now that you're particularly loving that you would suggest for us to check out?
So I think I have kind of 2 books that have really kind of grabbed me. So one, and it won the National Book Award, so it's not like a secret book, but I'm teaching it this semester too, and it's Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. So it's a weird book in that it's almost entirely written as a kind of TV screenplay, and it's Asian man, and he's an actor, and he only ever gets to be Asian guy 1, 2, or 3. He wants to become Kung Fu guy, and it's very much a book about something that I'm interested in because of my grandmother, but the kind of constraints and limitations of being Asian American in America, and the expectations of how you fit into the social order, especially in art. And it's just a really lovely, thoughtful, interesting, weird book. And I liked it a lot. And then the other book that really grabbed me is called The Knockout Queen by a writer named Ruthie Thorpe. It was just a really unexpected book for me. It's about this young gay teenage boy who narrates the story, whose best friend is this 6 foot tall volleyball player named Bunny Lampert. And in the course of the novel, Bunny ends up beating up another girl and putting her in a coma. And it's very much about this really strange yet tender narrative about these 2 outcasts who feel completely alien inside their bodies. And the way that they try to take care of each other. It's set in California. There's all this stuff about real estate. And it's just like I said, none of it, I wasn't prepared for any of it. It was so unexpected. And it's really, there are difficult moments. It's really graphic in some ways, but it was also just so tender. And it really captures that weirdness of knowing that this is your body. Like you can't change it, but it also doesn't feel quite right, right? I found it really lovely and interesting. And and now I've gone back and read all her books, and I think she's brilliant. I love her so much. So yeah, those are the 2 that really stick with me. And then I will just go back and say again, anybody I think would love Shirley Jackson. I just can't get enough of her work. I think she's incredibly funny. She can be incredibly dark. I think that her grasp of the human condition it's just so wonderful and so amazing. So yeah, those would be mine.
She's timeless.
And I just wanted to say, you know, I know we will end, but I keep talking about how isolated I am and how I like that. But also in the midst of the pandemic, these kind of events have been really sustaining for me, just to be able to see that people care about books and writing and ideas. And, you know, it means the world to me to be able to talk to people that care about it. So I really appreciate being asked to participate, and it's been really lovely. So I thank you for that.
You're
Yeah.
wonderful, Kevin. Just
Thank you.
I can't wait to read the next one.
Oh, thanks.
So, yeah, thank you so much. And I might add, I believe you said somewhere in the beginning, I don't know if we talked about it on here, is your book is now a screenplay? It's going to be a movie?
It got optioned by Sony 3000, Elizabeth Gabler, back right when it came out, and they've got a director and the screenplay's finished, and they're supposed to start casting, I think, in the next few months or something like that. I really stay out of it.
Right.
I
Right.
don't want to be calling constantly to ask, but if it
Exactly.
happens, it happens, and that will be lovely.
Yeah.
But I know not to wait, and when you live on a
So-
mountain, you don't have to.
So you
Right.
didn't
So,
you didn't
yeah.
say, Nicole, you need to do it this way, during the family thing.
No, I mean, I would have given the book to Nicole for free. So my agent told me not to talk to Nicole very much until it was done.
Joyce, you want to tell us about what's coming up next?
yeah, I want to first say thank you very much. Nancy DeCab and I have been texting back and forth going, oh my God, he is so fascinating. And you have set the bar so high for the rest of the year for us that I'm slightly concerned about where we go from here. Our next book, matter of fact, we sent an email today, but we've added one since the email went out. On February the 23rd, Alice Randall is going to do Black Bottom Saints. And if you get it at Parnassus, it will be a signed copy. And she also, she said it came with a small gift, which I don't know what it is.
A limited
Also-
edition playing card.
Is that what it is? Okay.
I think it's one of
And-
the saints.
Okay. And then I think there is like a specialty drink that when we do it, that she does as part of the whole thing. We'll tell you about it. So sign up for that. And then on March the 3rd, we are confirmed with Lindsay Crinks, who is written Praying with Our Feet. Am I telling you that right, Grace? Does that sound right? It's her new book, and
Green.
Lindsay has been extremely active with the homeless community in Nashville. It is fascinating. I'm excited to hear about that one. And we're working, I literally have texted somebody while this is going on about another book and another author for April. So I encourage you to watch and to sign up and to join WPC for our events. I will tell you our next Lunch and Learn is on February the 5th with Chief Drake, our new police chief. It's from 12 to 1. It's a free event. Anybody can sign up. It doesn't matter who you are. So again, Kevin, thank you. This was absolutely fascinating. I now want to come take your classes just to hear you talk all day. I mean,
Thank you.
thank
Kevin.
you, everybody. Have a great evening.